For years, Vladimir Putin believed that Ukraine's military would never be powerful enough to truly challenge his army or threaten his regime. Even when Ukrainian drones began flying over the front lines and into Russian regions, the president remained confident in the idea that it was impossible for his country to lose. Russia would always be stronger. There would always be an invisible ceiling or cap on how strong Ukraine could get, and it would never be enough to deal with the levels of lasting serious damage it needed to win the war. Putin was wrong, and Ukraine just proved it. It has smashed the power cap and shattered the ceiling, achieving what many believed to be impossible and rising to whole new heights of power and performance on the battlefield today. To understand this shift, we have to rewind to the early stages of Ukraine's ongoing campaign against Russian oil and energy infrastructure. Kyiv has been targeting locations like oil refineries and pipelines for several years now, but seriously upped the ante in 2025, which saw 21 of Russia's 38 major refineries targeted, representing a 48% increase in successful strikes when compared to the previous year. Throughout 2025, it seemed as though barely a week went by without news of more fires, explosions, and drone impacts at Russian oil plants. Cumulatively, these attacks took quite a toll on the country's economy and energy sector, with overall refinery capacity levels falling by a staggering 40% during the height of the strikes between August and October of 2025. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces also began attacking military production plants on a more regular basis, triggering fires and explosions in the places where Russia manufactures its drones, missiles, and the other munitions. However, while the impact of the attacks was important, and the images and videos shared online of massive explosions and plumes of smoke filling the air were visually impressive, the fact of the matter was that many of these strikes weren't anywhere near as effective as they needed to be. There were two big reasons for this. The first was the presence of Russian air defenses. While the efficiency of the Kremlin's defensive systems has been rightly called into question as the war has progressed, Russia still had quite deep stockpiles of important assets like the S-300, the more modern S-400, the Tor M2, the Buk M3, and the Pantsir SM. Once Russian commanders realized that Ukraine was attempting to attack their energy infrastructure, they repositioned many of these assets to key locations like refineries and oil terminals in order to shoot down most of the drones and missiles Kyiv sent their way. This in turn meant that even if some Ukrainian drones managed to hit their targets, many others were lost, which limited how much damage the country could deal to its opponent. The second, and arguably larger issue, was that Ukraine's forces were having to make do with relatively rudimentary and quite compact drones to carry out their strikes. Even the more advanced models could only carry relatively small warheads, which meant that even if they bypassed Russia's defenses and made it to their destinations, they weren't packing enough explosive power to actually put refineries out of action. Because of this, there were many instances in which drone strikes happened and facilities were briefly shut down but soon came back online. There was still damage and it still mattered, but it wasn't sufficient to trigger the kind of crisis and collapse Kyiv's forces were hoping for. In 2026, however, everything changed because Ukraine found solutions for both of those issues. First, it began systematically eradicating Russia's air defenses. Reports show that between June 2025 and March 2026, Ukraine carried out almost 500 attacks against enemy air defense infrastructure and another 433 against anti-access and aerial denial assets. Since then, the trend has continued. 24 radar systems were taken out just in Crimea between March and May of this year. 25 air defenses were destroyed in April alone, including Tor, Buk, Osa, and Pantsirs. Dozens upon dozens of even Russia's best systems like the S-400s have also been eliminated, and as Ukraine intensifies its attacks on enemy territory, the Kremlin's commanders have an increasingly small pool of assets to play with. As a result, they're having to pick and choose which towns, cities, and pieces of infrastructure they want to prioritize for protection, leaving others absolutely exposed. Following the mass drone attack on Moscow, for example, Russia reportedly moved more of its S-300 and S-400 defenses to the capital, weakening other areas in the process. One Ukrainian drone operator, nicknamed Churchill, revealed that Russia is losing the concept of layered air defense as more systems are destroyed and more blind spots emerge. As a direct consequence, it's now much easier for Ukraine to find clear corridors across Russian territories to the places it wants to target. It can deploy swarms of drones and salvos of missiles towards those locations without having to worry about a high risk of them being shot down en route. This in turn also means that Kyiv's forces can feel more confident about deploying bigger and heavier weapons against those very same targets. Which leads us on to the second big shift in 2026, the use of larger warheads. Prior to this point, Ukraine generally used warheads weighing in the tens of kilograms. As Euromaiden notes, that's simply not enough to penetrate the thick steel barriers and concrete walls found throughout oil refineries and military production plants, and if drones were only slightly off target, they could struggle to deal any real damage at all. Basically, they could damage a specific target if they hit it but needed a direct strike. Missing by a few feet or hitting on the other side of a wall would cause minimal damage. Repairs could be made quickly. Throughout 2025, Ukrainian analysts realized that something had to change. They'd been using lightweight warheads in order to allow their drones to carry more fuel and cover further distances in order to hit targets far beyond the Russian border. But that advantage came at a cost. The relatively tiny warheads simply weren't strong enough. Thankfully, a ready-made solution came in the form of the Firepoint FP2 drone. Initially boasting a maximum flight time of 2.5 hours, an operational range of up to 200 kilometers or 125 miles, and a warhead weighing up to 105 kilograms or 230 pounds, this system changed the game. Firepoint has since made modifications that allow the FP2 to carry a whopping 200 kilograms or 440 pounds of explosives across even greater distances of up to 370 kilometers or 230 miles. They cost more, but they're so much more effective than the simpler unmanned aerial vehicles that Kyiv had counted on in the past, like the Lyuti. And since their arrival on the scene, FP2 drones have been used in numerous mid- and long-range strikes on Russian infrastructure. They've blown holes in the sides of some of the most important pieces of oil refinery infrastructure, like primary distillation units. They've caused entire buildings to collapse at military production plants. And they've given Russia far greater damage to deal with and far bigger bills to pay than the simpler and smaller drones that came before them. And they're not the only ones. Ukraine has also started to use other heavy deep strike munitions that manage to combine both strong range with weighty warheads. The Behemoth drone, for example, is an aptly named beast of the skies that sports not one but two separate warheads, one weighing in at 40 kilograms or 88 pounds, and another weighing in at 35 kilograms or 77 pounds. As a one-way attack drone, the Behemoth doesn't drop its warheads. Instead, a tandem-charged warhead detonates on impact to punch through the target's outer defenses before the larger thermobaric warhead explodes inside moments later, causing far greater damage. With drones like this, Ukraine is no longer just damaging the external walls and shells of Russian factories and refineries. It's bypassing their barriers and wiping them out from within. This is making a massive difference on the ground. Attacks that might once have been deemed as a mere nuisance or inconvenience for Russia are now becoming veritable disasters. Strikes that would once have caused minimal damage that only required a couple of days to patch up are now putting facilities out of action for weeks or even months at a time. The bad news, at least as far as Ukraine is concerned, is that these heavier drones can only go so far. The Behemoth, for instance, is limited to distances of just 300 kilometers or 185 miles. That places them firmly in the middle-range category. But what if Ukraine wants to hit targets that are much further away? Fortunately, it has an answer for that as well. But before we get to that, you're watching The Military Show, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. For several years, the only way that Ukraine could feasibly hit targets that were hundreds of miles into Russia was with the use of long-range drones. It didn't have the kinds of missiles that could cover such vast distances. All it had were small drones carrying a few dozen pounds of explosives at the most. Many were shot down by Russian defenses, but some made it to their targets now and then. However, for the exact same reasons covered earlier on, they weren't able to deal lasting damage. Again, Ukrainian analysts identified this issue and worked on a way to fix it. And to fix an issue like this, the answer is quite simple. You need weapons that can travel further distances at greater speeds and deliver far larger payloads than pre-existing options. In short, you need cruise missiles. So Firepoint, the exact same company behind the FP2 drone and one of the biggest players in Ukraine's rapidly expanding defense sector, developed the FP5 cruise missile, otherwise known as the Flamingo. Thanks to its jet propulsion system, this missile, which costs around $500,000 per unit, boasts an incredible operational range of 3,000 kilometers or 1,900 miles. It carries a 1,150 kilogram or 2,540 pound warhead. It was unveiled in August 2025, and it took some time after that for Firepoint's developers to perfect the self-contained inertial navigation system that was necessary to allow this missile to function as intended and strike its targets reliably. Now that they've done that, the full ferocity of the Flamingo has been unleashed, and Russia simply can't cope with it. On June 27, reports emerged of multiple Flamingo missiles being launched at the Titan Barricade missile plant in Russia's Volgograd region, situated in the southern part of the country, approximately 500 kilometers (310 miles) from the front lines. Footage showed the unmistakable silhouettes of two of these mammoth missiles hitting the plant, which is responsible for assembling mobile launchers for ballistic missiles and artillery systems. And this was just the latest in a series of successful strikes involving the Flamingo missile. On June 10, for example, 5 Flamingos were dispatched towards the Vernier Progress Defense Electronics plant in Cheboksary, which is located in western Russia, 900 kilometers or 560 miles from the front. 2 of those missiles made it through, blasting by the factory's anti-drone protections and causing huge explosive damage on impact and fire damage in the aftermath. In the bomb department too, Kyiv has made some serious strides. In the past, it had to rely on Western supplies, which were often only available in limited quantities and tied to other restrictions that Ukraine had no control over. Now, however, Ukraine has changed the game by starting serial production on its own assets. Assets like the Equalizer glide bomb from developer DG Industries. Capable of traveling dozens of miles from the point of release, these bombs pack more than enough explosive firepower to wipe out Russian targets like air defense systems, radar stations, ammo depots, troop concentrations, tanks, and other armored vehicles. We've seen Ukraine carry out mid-range and long-range strikes for several years now, but the game has absolutely changed with the introduction of these heavier weapons. They're not just poking and prodding at Russia's assets and infrastructure anymore. Now, Kyiv is quite literally blowing targets to bits. The latest strikes are more damaging and costly for the Kremlin than anything that's come before, as Michael Bonnert, researcher of the California think tank RAND, notes. To even any casual observer, Ukrainian strikes have been having a higher and higher impact over time. And it's not just a question of more firepower, it's also a question of extended range. According to the latest reports, Ukraine today possesses sufficient munitions to target around half of Russia and more than 70% of its entire population. Russia's own monitoring channel, Radar Across All of Russia, recently reported air raid warnings in regions far and wide across the country. That includes 5 separate regions of the Volga Federal District, situated southeast of Moscow, the Astrakhan region, which is around 900 kilometers, 560 miles from Ukraine, and parts of the North Caucasus region, some areas of which are up to 1,200 kilometers or 750 miles from Ukraine. In central Russia, alerts have sounded out in Moscow, which is around 400 to 500 kilometers, 250 to 310 miles from Ukraine. Vladimir, which is 450 kilometers or 280 miles away, Tambov, which is 350 kilometers or 220 miles away, and Lipetsk, which is around 300 kilometers, 186 miles from Ukraine's border. On July 1st, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky even announced that his country's forces had struck an oil refinery in Ufa, a whopping 1,300 kilometers, over 800 miles away from the front line. It was the second time this location had been hit. A military facility in the Penza region was also struck, located around 600 kilometers or 370 miles from the front. This marks a major shift compared to the earlier stages of the conflict. In 2024, for example, the only Russian regions that really had to worry about Ukrainian attacks were those situated quite close to the border, and a large part of Ukraine's assets were also used against enemy assets within the occupied territories too. Now, almost nowhere in Russia feels truly safe. From the western regions to the edges of Siberia, the sound of air raid sirens is becoming a bigger part of everyday life as Ukraine brings the war home to the Russian public. And those sirens aren't mild inconveniences. Often, when an alert occurs, entire towns and cities have to shut down. Airports suspend operations, public transport services stop, and people are told to remain indoors or seek shelter underground. This has an effect, and even though Ukraine doesn't copy the Russian playbook, and target civilian homes and infrastructure, the Russian people are still having their lives impacted by the war in increasingly frightening and challenging ways. This in turn makes them more eager to find someone to blame, and many are pointing their fingers at one man only, Vladimir Putin himself. Consequently, Putin's popularity has plummeted. Even in state-backed surveys carried out by Kremlin mouthpieces, increasing numbers of Russians are airing real concerns about whether their president is still fit to lead. And it's likely to get even worse for Putin and his people in the weeks and months to come, because Ukraine's arsenal is only going to get stronger from here on out. Indeed, recent reports also suggest that Ukraine may have fired its first ever domestically produced long-range ballistic missile. This news is based on data from Russia's own Ministry of Defense. In a recent report, the Kremlin's MOD claimed that over a period of 24 hours, its air defenses intercepted over 600 drones, 7 aerial bombs, and what it described as a long-range operational tactical missile. Moscow didn't provide any further details about what type of missile that was, nor has Ukraine given any official statement on the matter at this time. However, we do know that Firepoint has been working on its FP9 ballistic missile and recently confirmed that it was approaching the flight testing stage. The company's head of design, Dennis Stielerman, affirmed that tests would begin in either summer or early fall. It's possible that those tests have already commenced and that the FP9 has been fired against one or more Russian targets. If so, this would represent another enormous addition to Kyiv's arsenal. The FP9 was designed with the express intention of destroying targets deep inside Russia's regions. It boasts an estimated operational range of 855 kilometers or 530 miles, can reach remarkable speeds of up to 2,200 meters a second, 7,220 feet per second, and carries a huge warhead weighing up to 800 kilograms or 1,760 pounds. We've seen Kyiv's defense sector produce world-leading drones and powerful cruise missiles. A ballistic missile is the final piece of the puzzle, and if the FP9 is already operational, there's no telling how much damage Ukraine could do with it, as Bloomberg notes. If confirmed, the firing of a ballistic missile would mark a new step in Kyiv's effort to expand its domestically produced long-range strike capabilities beyond drones and cruise-type systems. Even if these reports turn out false and the FP9 isn't quite ready to deploy yet, it's only a matter of time until we start seeing this missile send valuable Russian infrastructure sky high. When combined with heavier drones, new glide bombs, and Flamingo cruise missiles, Ukraine is packing more heat than at any other point in its history, giving Russia a tidal wave of problems it simply cannot solve. Now, to learn more about how those problems are piling up on Putin's desk and driving the Russian president even deeper into crisis, check out this video. Alternatively, watch this video to discover how Moscow's businesses, investors and elites are starting to wave the white flag, recognizing that the war is unwinnable and urging Putin to bring it to an end. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the Military Show for more great content just like this.